Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you so much for coming to the joint meeting of the Dudley-Charlton Regional School District, Dudley Finance Appropriations Advisory Committee, Board of Selectmen, Charlton Finance Committee, and the Charlton Board of Selectmen. It's lovely to see so many people here tonight. We have several speakers this evening. I am not going to ramble on or waste your time. We have a lot to get through tonight, and a lot of it has to do with money, which I know is important to each and every one of you. That school budget is key. The price of nothing goes down, and we have to address that. But before we do, we have several state legislators who are here to speak tonight. Senator Ann Goby. We have a representative from Ryan Fatman's office. Bill is here. I got that right, Bill?
Yes.
And Representative Peter Durant is present. Thank you so much for coming, and we wanted to offer them a little bit of time to have the floor tonight so they could tell us what's going on up in Boston and what they're looking forward to this legislative season.
How would you like this, Madam Chair? What would you like us to do?
Why don't you, if you don't mind, give us an update
Sure.
about what's going on up there?
I have a few copies of things, and this is similar to what we had done instead. I can pass this around. I don't know if I have enough for everyone. It's just a little bit of what had happened in last year's budget pertaining to regional schools specifically, and then some of the things that we're trying to do, a little bit about the governor's budget, and then I'll be happy to talk to you about a few things that are going on with Ways and Means. We, at the Ways and Means hearing on, keep forgetting what day this is, on Monday, we were down in Fall River at Bristol Community College, and all the education folks came to speak with us that day. So again, just so people know, I'm Ann Goby, State Senator, and Charlton is part of my district. So I'm very happy to represent this school district as well. I have 11, just so that you kind of my background too, I have 11 regional schools in the 28 towns that I represent. I have 5 standalone schools, and students in those 28 towns go to 4 different Voc schools. So it really kind of runs the gamut. And as you can imagine, education is the topic. And I think Peter would agree with that, Bill, that it is absolutely the topic on Beacon Hill right now. The governor's talking about it. He's come out with some plans. The Senate and the House. This coming Friday, there will be the first of several hearings, but the hearing on Friday is going to be in the Education Committee on the Promise Act, which basically takes a look at what was done through the Foundation Budget Review Commission and try to put all of those things into statute, if you will. And that's what the bill is looking at, and to have an implementation plan of over several years to fully implement the Foundation Budget Review Commission report and to boost up education by over $1 billion. We all, I think everyone kind of knows all the same thing. In many of the districts that I represent, that Peter represents, that Ryan represents, and Paul Frost does, we have declining enrollments. So we run into that situation, and this isn't, I'm not telling anything that folks on the school committee and the superintendents, anyone else doesn't know. But you have the declining enrollments, but the cost, of course, don't go down with that. The costs continue to rise and go up. One of the things that we're looking at this year, in addition to some of the funding as far as the Foundation Budget Review Commission, is to look at some other areas that we haven't looked at a lot before, and one is some money for rural aid to kind of take care of some of that problem for those schools with that declining enrollment. This past year, during the Senate budget, I worked very closely with Adam Hines, and Adam's the senator for the Berkshire area, and those of you who know Superintendent Bonaconte, you know that for years and years and years, he's really been pushing kind of a rural aid formula to add in and to make that part of the whole education formula. Last year, during the budget debate and in the final budget, we were able to get $1.5 million that was spread between about 20 schools. And that was based on if you had, if the students, if it was under 20 students per mile, and then there were some per capita in there too for income. What we're looking at this year is to expand that formula and taking a look at what the state of Wisconsin does. And under that formula, that you would have students 40 students per square mile, which would encompass a heck of a lot more school districts, including this one, and do a little bit more looking at the median income, kind of how we do it for people who receive services, so 110% of their income. And again, that would help out a lot more schools in the area, and that would also come, well, the kind of the pie in the sky number would be about $400 per student. And you say, oh, well, how the heck could we ever get to that? Just so that you know, in the governor's proposed budget, that the students in Worcester, he has them at $600 a student, while we get 20. There's no equity. There's no equity in the governor's budget. And there is absolutely no question that we have to figure out a way to have a more equal formula. And it's not that those kids in Worcester don't deserve it, but we deserve it too. And unfortunately, a lot of that is based on the very high incidence of English language learners, and so they're getting more of that money, but not taking into account the issues that we have in our regional school districts, in our cities and towns. So you're going to see on Friday, it is going to be a push with the Promise Act. I do have some copies of that. And the Promise Act, depending on, I don't think it's going to pass exactly the way it is. But the Education Committee knows that this is extremely important. On Friday, I know that the MTA is organizing buses throughout the state to bus people in. I know a lot of my superintendents are coming in on Friday. I will be there Friday to testify. Not that everything in this Promise Act is perfect, but it gets the conversation going. And I think it does get us to a point of where we need to be as far as implementing the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendations. We all know it's been 1993 since we've redone anything with the formula. That took a number of years to implement. We're 25 years later, and things have changed dramatically. I give the Education Committee a lot of credit for taking this up. This is the first set of bills that they're taking up in committee. And it sends to me a signal, and I don't know what you think about it, it kind of sends to me the signal that not only is it important, but I think that they would like to try to do something in conjunction when the House budget is going to be done in April and when the Senate budget will be done in May. So I do think that a lot of these funding ideas are on a very fast track. And so if you have concerns, if you have questions, if you want to weigh in, this is the time to do it. Because I do think this is going to move fairly quickly. Because people are kind of tired of waiting. And I think that's what the superintendents here, I think that's what folks here, that we know that we need more money, and we have to start that process. The other day, when Secretary Pizer spoke before the Ways and Means Committee, he understands, he realizes that it's time to do something too. Of course, he's there on behalf of the governor, so he's really touting the things within the governor's budget. There are things that even with the Promise Act that are still concerns for school districts. One that tends to be one that I kind of come back to a lot is the charter schools. I think, charter schools are great. However, the funding for them, not so great. Under the governor's proposal, that you'd be reimbursed for 100% year one, 60% in year two, 40% in year three, then after that, you're on your own. No funding. When we were in New Bedford the other day, down Fall River, talking to the New Bedford folks, for the city of New Bedford, for charter school in their FY18 budget last year, it was costing them, I think something like $23 million for charter school. They received of that $23 million about $3 million, $4 million back from the state, which you can do the math, what it cost that community. And that's just one community. And we see it in these areas. We saw what happened in the town of Southbridge. I mentioned to the secretary that I thought it was horrendous at the same time that you're putting a town into receivership, that you open up a charter school a few miles away, and you have a school district that can't afford to pay their bills, and now they're shelling out another $1 million for a charter school. So, anyway, I do think as we look to things that are happening with this budget, and when we're trying to do things, I think we also have to look at those other areas. Charter schools. Obviously, regional school transportation is always a major, major issue. We had about 80% reimbursement last year. That's what the governor has proposed in his budget. I mean, if we could get, and if we knew that you were going to have 80% every single year and could plan on that, I think even though it's not the 100% that people want and people expect, because that was what was promised back when regional schools were, when regionalization first happened in the 60s, I think that if you could have a number and be sure of that number every year, obviously it makes planning a heck of a lot easier. The out-of-district placements, the special ed, the circuit breaker. So all of those other kind of funding things that are not necessarily part of the commission or part of the Promise Act are obviously all extremely important, and all things that we have to make sure that we need to do our best to get either fully funded or as much funding as possible. So that's kind of my short little spiel right now, and I'll let my colleagues, if they have other things to add, and I'm happy to take any questions afterward as well.
Thank you very much. That was a great overview of what's going on, and you have highlighted issues that I know everybody here at this table is concerned about. Yes?
I was going to suggest
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Durant.
Sure. So I think Senator Goby hit all the highlights, all the talking points that we all are very concerned with. And I just want to reiterate a couple of things. I was with the Lieutenant Governor yesterday, and they're talking about this as the year of education. So we expect that we're going to see some movement on this. But I think Senator Goby is exactly right. Is what we're seeing is with it falling short in the 11th hour last year. This and some of the other major issues that have been taking place or tried to take place last term, we're seeing them taken up much earlier in this session. So we're seeing this education reform package come through in the Promise Act and the governor's. And as Senator Goby again pointed out, you know, I don't think that you're going to see either one of those in their forms come out the way they went in. But that's the whole process of the sausage making. So we're gonna see a version that comes out, but I do think that we're gonna see that version early. I think that it's very possible we see it here for this budget cycle. So the House is taking up the budget now. As Senator Goby also mentioned, she is on Ways and Means, and the hearings are going on at this point. We should see the budget come out in a couple of weeks or so. The House will take up the budget the last week of April. Right now, as you have probably seen, the revenues for the state are falling short, even though we had a really good February. We're about $300 million or so behind the benchmark, so we'll see if that starts to catch up. February was a good month. We were over by $100 million, so you know what they say, a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there, and pretty soon you talk about real money. And so that's what we're starting to see, is some of this money come in. Whether that trend will continue, we'll know in another couple of months. But as it goes to the Senate, hopefully we'll be able to have a better outlook on what's taking place in the revenue that's coming in. You know, but really that's the short list. But I think we're going to see that education reform. I think we're going to see that in this budget cycle, and so we'll go from there. We'll see where it takes us.
Thank you very much. Bill?
Yeah, so I'll keep my remarks brief because most of it has already been covered here, so I'll just relay what the senator wanted me to bring along. First, he wanted me to apologize that he couldn't attend tonight. He will be willing to attend other events that you have here in the future. A last-minute scheduling conflict came up, and I had to come in his place. So, you know, I just wanted to re-highlight a lot of what Senator Goby mentioned here. You know, we have a lot of the same priorities. One of the big ones is that we want to try and get regional school transportation fully funded. I thought we were coming in with a big number by saying we had 3 regional schools in our district, but then I heard your number of 11. So between our 2 districts, that's 14 regional schools. So it's a big priority for both of our offices. Special education circuit breaker funding, that's another thing that's going to be one of our priorities over the next legislative session. We're also in support of this the rural school initiative. because it seems to be a good thing that would fit in well in terms of funding. I had a lot of these big factual numbers too, but Senator Gomi already said those, so I'll save myself some time on that and save all your time. And so we're also interested in exploring this early college prep work that's going out. And basically what it is it's funding to schools that offer partnerships with local colleges, and it's essentially, the senator said it was essentially a $550 per pupil reimbursement, so that's something that we're going to be looking at over the legislative session as well. But a lot of what has been mentioned here already is what we're planning on supporting over the next legislative session. So we thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. That update is greatly appreciated. As I look around the table, I am reminded of the meeting we had back in December of 2017, where everybody came together to work on a multi-year approach to budget issues, much like our state legislators were just talking about. But you know, I also see a lot of new faces. So before we go into the question and answer period, if we have that, I'd just like to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves, because there are some new faces. As I said, I'm Deb Noble. I am from the Charlton Board of Selectmen.
Chris Nash, Interim Superintendent.
Stephanie Reed, School Committee.
Pauline O'Coin, School Committee. Kathy Cabana, School Committee.
Elaine Rabbit, School Committee.
Ann Goby, Senator.
Rich Matthew, Finance Director for the district.
Stephen Lamarche, Incoming Superintendent.
Bill Fredericks, Legislative Aide to Senator Fatman.
Peter Durant, State Representative.
Don Folio, Charlton Finance Director.
Joanne Savanac, Treasurer Collector, Charlton.
Karen Spiewak, Charlton Board of Selectmen.
John Grodowski, Charlton Finance Committee.
Keith Johnson, Charlton Finance Committee.
Jerry Doble, Charlton Finance.
Henry Kamasi, Charlton Finance.
Carol Bruder, Finance. Laura O'Connor, Charlton Finance.
Mike Mayotte, Dudley Finance.
Ann Gaudreau, Dudley Finance.
Jason Julian, Charlton Finance.
Rich Carmignani, Treasurer Collector from Dudley.
Gary Chicken, Dudley Selectmen.
Greg Valiakonis, Dudley Town Administrator.
Steve Sullivan, Dudley Board of Selectmen.
Joe Spiewak, Charlton Finance Committee.
Robin Craver, Town Administrator.
Chris Starcheski, Dudley Middle School Principal.
Dean Packard, Charlton Middle School Principal.
Bill Chaplin, Shepherd Hill Principal.
Diane Seifel, Dudley Elementary School Principal.
Barbara Martirosian, Interim Director of Curriculum.
Lucas Stevens, Recreation Commission.
Bill Borowski, candidate for Charlton Select.
Kevin Foley, Dudley Charlton Teachers.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Oh, we have more.
Sherry Julian, I'm the Secretary of the Finance Committee for Charlton.
Thank you for being here, Sherry. Does anyone here have any questions for the legislators who have shown up this evening?
I feel like I'm at your shoulder.
Oh.
I do see
Oh.
Representative Frost coming.
Oh,
in
my.
also. So, we want to, well, I think we should get another chair.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Frost. It's nice to see you this evening.
There is a chair.
We have one more speaker before we have questions. Representative Paul Frost is here.
That's a way to make an entrance.
Especially when people go, ooh.
Talk about pressure.
We've reached the point on the agenda where legislators are speaking, and then we're going to open the floor up for a brief question and answer session if we have time. And there you are.
Oh, well,
We
you guys want to go?
already,
And we already
You already
did.
did? You already said your piece?
we were here on time, Paul.
Actually, we planned
Fair
this
enough,
to see if
fair
we were
enough.
going to say the same thing.
Fair enough. Got to hear what I could, but the, yeah, did what my colleagues said.
Read the highlights.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. I mean, I believe you, I'm assuming you already covered how revenues are going this fiscal year compared to, so where the projections were and everything, and obviously, as I'm sure my colleagues already mentioned, the House and I'm turning down my volume just in case, the House and Senate have already begun their hearings around the state for Ways and Means for the budget, and sometime in the middle of April, House Ways and Means will come out with their budget, and I'm sure Peter already mentioned this, but we'll have a few days to put in amendments, and then right after April school vacation week is over, we'll debate the budget, if we'll debate amendments, stuff of that nature. And then a few weeks later, the Senate will get it and do their thing to it. And come June, hopefully the two sides come together sooner rather than later on a final version before it gets sent to the governor's desk and so on. So obviously, it really just depends. I think when's the next revenue estimate supposed to? When's the next revenue number is going to come in? A couple end of the month, or is one coming out for mid month? Because usually they kind of release them every 2 weeks, and then there's a so. You know, I understand we were up in February from above projections, but still down overall. So hopefully that the increase happens. I think understand part of the issue could be that with the change in the federal tax code, that has delayed how money is coming in. So so we still got to get our heads around that. I think I don't know if that's 100% certain that's part of the issue, but I believe that was some of the issue they were mentioning was usually some revenues coming in at a certain time of year are now being pushed back. They're still coming in, but they just didn't come in earlier. So it's kind of changing the way things work. So hopefully we'll still see some progress, and we know the governor proposed a change in how to do the formula a little bit, and I'm sure we're going to have some discussions on that. You know, waiting to see what House Ways and Means recommends on that, if they're going to keep the same formula, if they're going to recommend some of the adjustments. Like any time you fool with the formula, there's going to be people who do well in it, and there's going to be people who don't do as well in it. You know, and that's always a challenge. So you know, education will always be important to me, as it is my colleagues, and we'll continue to support it to the best of our abilities. I know regional transportation is always an issue, and as well as the circuit breaker. We still need to address that, the high cost of special education, and you know, hopefully the budget coming out of Ways and Means will hopefully continue progress in those directions, and hopefully we'll start seeing those revenues catch up, so we don't have to worry about being short this fiscal year.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
I just have one.
Yes,
Is there
sir.
any chance that school choice will go up from the $5,000? Does anyone know if that's on the table at all?
I think everything's on the table, to be honest with you. I
Because that's the
think
same
probably
thing that-
everything is. I haven't heard that, in fact, I was just taking a quick look to see what the small town administrators and MTA and some of their priorities. Charter schools end up being more of a priority than the school choice.
Okay.
Just Senator Goby.
Yes.
We receive $5,000 for school choice, but if students go to the state online academy, they receive $7,500.
Oh, okay.
So there's an inequity
Yeah,
in school
yeah.
choice. So regular public school districts only receive $5,000, but if they go to the state online academy, it's $7,500. So it should be equitable.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that.
Just have a kind of a general question, but you said something about helping in college for $550 or something for prospective college students.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there's anything involved with that you may want to encourage college, people that want to go to college, the kids that want to go to college, to look at careers that might be more advantageous to paying their loans.
Noted. This was just something we took an initial glance at, and it was something the senator was interested in looking at. What it would do is it would help, anyone that these partnerships, I guess, it would be those who offer classes in conjunction. I don't know how that entirely works. I didn't take any of those when I was in high school, so I wouldn't know off the top of my head, but that was just one of the initiatives that we had looked at initially.
I think the goal of the bill is for school districts, particularly at the high school level, to develop partnerships with local universities or colleges similar to dual enrollment, and to provide some kind of an incentive in doing that, because particularly the cost is usually borne back by the school district in trying to figure out how this is going to happen. So that would be my sense, but I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with the bill. Yeah.
Yeah, That's what it is. It's a new enrollment category. I'm just reading, it's an early college and career pathways program. And they expect that it would initially enroll about 1,300 students, and their hope would be to get up to 70,000. But that point that you brought up about making sure that jobs were kind of meshing, I can tell you that between what's happening on K through 12 and speaking with especially the community college presidents, they are absolutely looking at that and trying to make sure that they're offering programs that make sense for what the students are going to remain in this area, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whether it's things in nursing. So they are trying to do that now, but you're absolutely right that that's extremely important because college loan debt is off the charts. It has surpassed credit card debt in the nation. It's just behind mortgages.
You know, I could add, it's slightly close to that, is that one of our colleagues is filing legislation that requires that schools take AP exams. In other words, if a kid gets a 3, 4, or 5 and qualifies to get college credit, not all colleges take it. So it's a hit or miss on whether or not a college you're going to is willing to take this basically college level course you took in high school, and you did so well enough on the test that you qualified that you should get credits, and not all schools do, or some schools only take it if you get a 5, but or if you get a 4, they'll just, if you get a 3, 4, or 5, they'll just, you don't have to take that class, that equivalent class in college, but they don't give you the 3 credits for it. And I gotta say, from my daughter's experience, and it's completely personal, she was lucky that, and fortunate if she worked hard, so she was more than lucky, but she was fortunate that Auburn High had a good program, and she walked out of high school with 18 college AP credits, and is considered she entered this year as a freshman. As of January 1st, she's considered as a first semester sophomore. Because she had those 18 credits she could carry over. She actually had more, but they'll only take 18. That's going to take a lot of money off her bill if she can finish early. Again, some schools are better than others, but I think that's something we really need to look at, especially whether they're private or public, when you're asking for public money in some way, shape, or form, whether it's lieu of taxes, whether it's taxpayer dollars, and again, most of that could be federal, but I understand, but through grant programs or subsidies or other things, I think at some point, if our high schools are offering these programs to these kids, and these kids are doing well in them, they're meeting the expectation, they're taking these courses and they're passing these very difficult exams, that there should be some ability to be has value. And it shouldn't just be something, I think, where colleges just, don't, oh, good for you, we'll put that down as, in your effort, but we're not going to take anything out of it. We're not going to, make you take less. And, and I think that would be financially help the kids, but it makes more sense, and I think it would encourage more kids to get involved in AP programs in their high schools, and I think that's something we should look more into and hopefully get somewhere with.
Well, and I just want to say, I think it's a broader discussion as well about, and I think you hit on it, about what kids are taking and how they can get more involved in some of those career paths that actually have jobs waiting for them on the other end of the pipeline there. And so I think you're seeing a lot of things that are trying to take place on that level, trying to make sure. And I think I think Senator Goby hit upon it, was what the community colleges are doing. Quinn Sig is doing some great work with advanced manufacturing and things of that nature, and those are some great programs that they're putting forward. I think we see on the federal level some initiatives to put colleges a little bit on the hook for how much debt they're allowing their students to go into and not have any skin in the game. Coming out on the other end, we still have a lot of students with, just as Ann said, college debt has now surpassed mortgages. I put forward a bill this year that says college debt should be treated like a 401k, where an employer can contribute a portion to pay down that student debt, tax-free, just like a 401k. So there's a lot of different programs out there, but I think you're right. At the heart of this is we need to help kids understand that there's career paths, and then there's career paths, right? And we need to work for getting them into something that has a job waiting for them on the other end.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions? Yes, sir.
The only point I want to make is that I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. But if I read the governor's plan correctly, it really kind of matures around 2026.
Right, it's a.
So
yeah.
what I would respectfully ask the legislative body is to not have baby steps in this process. Everyone is coming together. You have MTA, you have superintendents, you have a lot of organizations coming together for reform. Even if the reform isn't monetary in the first year, if it could be really substantive in equity, in changes and adjustments and formulas and stuff, that would be phenomenal. But 2026 is a long way away for our maturation of ed reform.
Right. Yeah. We've heard that pretty loud and clear.
Okay, all right, Chris.
Well, I have one other question, if you don't mind. It'll get me in a lot of trouble, but
That's okay.
we have a lot of programs and a lot of groups that are helping young girls improve and get better and get different different careers and things like that, which is good. Because in my generation, it was a lot different. Obviously, I'm a little bit older than most everybody here. But one of the things that concerns me a little bit, and I have 3 girls, 2 granddaughters, so they do good. But I have a great-grandson who's 8 years old, and one of my concerns is that he doesn't get left out. If we push so much for helping the young girls, which is fine, I hope the young boys don't get left out one way or another, because they deserve the same thing. And it's just a comment that I have in general in schools.
Yeah, I don't see that, to be honest with you. In fact, if anything, once you get into the college level, that most of the programs are actually for young men of color. And that's in the governor's plans on for his higher ed. And so anyway, yeah, and you know, if you look in most communities, there are more women. The percentage of women in Massachusetts is higher than the percentage of men, and you know, I think maybe that was probably true 20, 30 years ago, but I do think that isn't so much the case anymore. I mean, you may disagree, but.
I'm a father of 3 daughters, so I've contributed to that number of women outweighing men. I will say one thing, you know, one of the things, again, you know, learning through the process, when you have children, now like a child going through college and stuff, you start to, as they grow and they reach certain things, you're starting to see what opportunities are there for them, what aren't there for them, and you see things in a different light, you know. And I gotta say, one thing that I've learned over the years, and it's kind of interesting, and I've had a number of people tell me, more so off the record than they would, I don't think I could ever put them on the record, but is that it's no secret that a lot of times colleges, and I'm not saying our state colleges, but a lot of colleges out there will have a male-female ratios that they need to keep. And so what's happening, I think, in a lot of colleges, what I've been hearing, is that women, there are more women going to college than men. But a lot of these schools, they need to, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's federal stuff or what have you, need to have more of a balance of 50-50. It could be just the facilities they have. You know, you have so much dedicated to one gender or the other, so it could be that as well. I'm not, you know. But there are times when the bar for women to get into that college is higher than a man's. Because there's so many women going for whatever X amount of spots, and they need men to apply to try to get to that ratio. Being a boy in Massachusetts might end up working out when he gets to college and stuff like that. We have a little bit more opportunities, but I have heard that on occasion that, and again, it could just be the way the dorms work. It could be the way, you know, how things work, but they generally a lot of colleges try to keep a goal of a 50-50, and they're finding that just boys aren't applying as en masse as girls are. So, you know, there's more competition among the females, if they have an X amount of spots, there's more competition among the females than maybe the males for spots at certain colleges.
I think in some occupations, like, not engineering, but plumbing, electrical, welding, tends to be a lot of boys who probably are not gonna go to college right away, maybe later. So you're probably gonna have some inequities there. And I think with the Voc schools, I think it's really important for them to train engineers, not engineers, I mean, plumbers and draftsmen and welders. We need those kind of employees, because we can't get along without them. So I enjoy the Voc schools because they get those kind of people going. And in those careers, you can form your own little business and do quite well in that. It's just a point, so that's my point for Voc schools. But
Thank you. Yes, Robin?
I guess it would be school-related because it's finances. And you probably already know where I'm going at this point, which is, right now Charlton stands to lose and has been challenged with its taxes for solar. And it's gonna be really important. So I'm talking about solar and asking you to really take a look at how we do not lose, because it's not only us, it's gonna be anyone, that these, now that there's 3 ATV cases against the town saying that large solar arrays are exempt, there's a lot of pushback on towns now to either go into a pilot or the threat of losing their tax money. So I think there's 2 bills going forward. I think it's an extremely important issue for Charlton. We have, how many is it, Karen? 20?
I thought it was 25, but last I read, I thought it was
30 or 31, so.
There's several in the pipeline.
We stand to lose $1 million in tax revenue. That's not value, that's actual tax revenue. So it's very important to us, and I want to thank you, Peter, for coming up to MMA and talking about it also. But we need to have something done, and we're hoping that that will be a quick fix.
Yeah, we've been pushing on that bill. I don't know, I forget the number off the top of my head, but we've been pushing the bill and working with that. I'm gonna try to see if we can't sneak it into the budget. It's gonna be tough, but it's gonna be one of the things I talked to Chairman Michaelwitz about when I see him next week.
Tell us who we need to call. We
Yeah.
can write letters and do whatever we need to do.
The bill is, it's before the Telecommunications and Energy Committee. I don't even know if they've scheduled any hearings as of now. But the Small Town Administrators Association, this is also one of their priorities, because of course, rural areas have more open land and they're more prime. You're not, it's not Boston that's seeing the large solar arrays. It's not gonna happen. It's out in our area. So it's absolutely an important issue, and so something will happen with it. I think so, because there's just too much. And even on the state side, there is now a disincentive that they're putting, and when I say they, the Department of Energy Resources, now it's a disincentive to have those large solar arrays. They want people to stick with, using rooftop solar, and to get away from a lot of those. So that's starting to change a little bit. And that may make a difference for the folks who want to come in to develop. They're not getting those kind of incentives that they had received in the past.
Well, we don't mind them getting the incentives.
No, I understand,
We just
but
don't
the tax,
want
right. I know.
double dipping
Yeah,
with
yeah,
not paying
yeah.
their fair taxes.
No, it's been very confusing, and we know that.
Well, we were at the planning board meeting, and I think that was, I found it disingenuous that you have the solar company there who is saying, gee, we're not gonna pay any taxes, but, if we win our court case, we'll enter into a pilot with you.
Yeah, I
Really?
think that would be a
Who's actually gonna do that? Who's gonna say, gee, we just want a court case saying we don't have to pay taxes, but no, we'll voluntarily pay our taxes. I thought that was pretty disingenuous, and I think this is an issue that's not gonna go away. We're seeing a lot of pushback on it, so I think, I'm hopeful we can get something going.
And please let us know what we can do to help with that.
Absolutely.
We have a solar committee that's been pretty
Yeah.
active.
Yeah, Karen's
Yep.
been very active on it, and she's a wonderful resource
Mhm.
when it comes to the issues with solar in Charlton and the area.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess my other piece, which I always ask, is there any chance to get an early resolution on the monies? Before we have to go to town meeting.
And Peter just passes that on.
I'm all in favor of that. I don't know where they are with, if they're concerned about doing something too early when they keeping track of the current situation with revenues for this fiscal year, but generally, yeah, this is something, a time when we'd love to do it in March, and I know in the past, we've offered in our rules debates to try to say that sometime in the second or third week of March, we would try to release revenue numbers, at least a minimum of what communities can expect. At least, and sometimes we can get it done, and sometimes, they'll do it like a week before they release the budget, so, or not at all, so.
Yeah, it's been a little while since that was done, and after, we had that horrendous year in 2009, when the Senate had to cut $1 billion between April and May, when their budget came out, it gave people a lot of cold feet, trying to come out with early resolutions.
Could I make the final comment?
Sure.
So I go back to ed reform.
Yes.
I go back to the inception. My remembrance is the original case, Webby v. Dukakis. Then it became Scott McDuffie. Mr. Webby was a librarian in Brockton, and he is the one who said, where you rest your head at night is the type of education you get. And they took up the lawsuit. We've been waiting. We've been waiting for years and years and years and years, and we well know that everyone's been pushing it down because there are going to be winners and losers. So this Friday, as you well know, the Mass Association of School Superintendents are making it its #1 priority, because quite frankly, as a superintendent, as someone who's been in education for almost 50 years, I remember the inception. I remember where I was when it came out, and I remember the mandates. They have not changed. The lists go on and on and on and on and on, and nothing has changed. As a regional school committee member for 15 years, I fought for regional transportation. It was at 50%. It's never going to get to 100% unless everyone recognizes the need. So while I appreciate the effort, we need to recognize that this has not been overnight. The school districts have struggled for all of these years with all of the changes that we've had to implement. And we still have seen no effective change in the formula that has brought more equity. Because where you rest your head at night still determines your funding. If you don't believe that, look at all the hyphenated schools, look at all the W schools, and you'll figure out who they are and how much money they spend per pupil. You'll see this evening when we talk about it, where we are, we're below state average by 23% in our funding per pupil. So I think while I appreciate the effort, I've been listening to it for a long time, and nothing has changed substantially. Nothing has changed. And so, you can go back and we can do whatever we want, but you can't keep kicking this can around. We need to do something. And every single governor who's sat in there has said, #1 priority. Hasn't happened. So I hope it does.
What specifically
Well,
do you think that should be changed that would, because here comes, you mentioned it right when you started.
the funding formula.
People have been somewhat, yeah, right.
The funding formula needs
Great,
to
but
change. We need
who's
to get
gonna
more
win?
money for circuit breaker. We've got mandates coming out right now. There's a
No,
new
no,
law
no,
on ELL.
we get back to but the formula distribution
Right.
is, okay, we're not, I understand the circuit breaker, that's, yes, we should be funding that, yeah, I get all that, regional transportation, I get all that, but if you're talking about the Chapter 70 formula in itself, you did mention, like you said, there are gonna be winners, there are gonna be
Yep,
losers.
absolutely.
But if your community is the loser, are you gonna be advocating for it?
None of you are you? You're not going to be if you represent that community.
Right, I understand, so
But
but even
reality
as
is
you as a
that-
superintendent, if you come out and it's like, well, the formula is gonna hurt us more than help us, we're better way off the way it was.
Then there are other ways to address some of that. So go and fund regional transportation 100%. Circuit breaker is wonderful, but that's only extraordinary cost.
Right.
Our costs go up in other areas around special ed transportation, for example. So find other mechanisms, because you're very right. The formula, there are going to be winners and losers. I can name those 10 towns that everybody knew about. There were 11 that everybody knew about were the winners and the losers years ago. It still happens, but the reality is, as long as the funding formula stays the same, as long as we have property taxes basically from towns and cities that support the majority of your educational budget, then the W towns and the hyphenated towns will still have more money per pupil to spend, and the inequity will still be there. It will still be there.
Thank you.
That is the reality.
Yeah, it's,
Thank you.
what's kind of interesting is that, of course, Brockton, as you know, is looking to sue again.
That's right.
But you're right as far as some of the changes, the other changes that have to be made in conjunction with this. Give you an example, now there's a new commission that was formed, they met for the first time last week to look at transportation in all facets of schools, because one thing, as someone that represents a majority of regional school districts, I hear from my standalone districts, so, why aren't I, does when you talk about the hyphenated, does a Concord Carlisle need regional school transportation money reimbursement like a North Brookfield could use, right? But because they're not a regional school, they're not getting a penny for it. And, do they need it? So this group met for the first time last week. Alice Peisch, who is the chair of the Education Committee, happens to be the House chair of that, and Adam Hines is the Senate chair. They're going to be having, I think, at least 6 public hearings. They're going to go throughout the state, and they have a final report that will be due in December. And they're looking at every out-of-district transportation, special ed transportation, transportation for standalone districts plus regional school transportation. So they are looking at that. That is happening now.
One of the things that I would point out, it would be interesting to note, last year, I was the interim superintendent in Oxford, and Oxford, Dudley-Charlton, and a number of other communities joined together to do a collaborative general transportation bid. We were held hostage. We got no bids. Okay? We got no bids. Joint purchasing power, when you have a conglomerate, if you will, who basically says, we're not going to bid, and we're the only provider that's really big enough and has enough buses for you, or another company says, we won't come into your area because it's too costly for us, we don't have a hub. So Oxford, for example, last year has a hub satellite out of Worcester, that's why they bid on Oxford. So we ended up having to disband what we thought made sense, like a joint purchase group. Because they held us hostage.
Yeah, and that is part of this as well, because that's what ends up happening. That happens a lot, especially on the Berkshires. They get one bus company like that. Yeah, it's a real problem.
No, thank you so much. No, your
I'm
comments are
passionate
great.
about this.
And when you were talking about the case against, is it Webby versus
Webby v.
Dukakis?
Dukakis was the original case that started in
That's
reform.
it's not unique to Massachusetts.
Right.
I lived
No,
in Connecticut during
absolutely.
Chef v. O'Neill.
You're right.
And it was the same exact issue, where you lay your head at night, depends on the education you get. Fortunately, I think the students get a very good education in the school district. I would like to segue into the budget update, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Since we're talking about money, I think it's an easy transition.
Does someone not
Does
have a
everybody
folder?
have,
Over, okay. Anybody?
pass it down? Does everybody have a folder? Yes, here?
First,
I have one more. Absolutely. You're welcome.
Can I make a comment to the legislative body before?
Absolutely. Before we get started, go right ahead.
Thank you. To Representative Frost, you had made a comment about what else can be done, and I serve on the statewide committee for regional schools, and so some of this information is what we discuss on a monthly basis. So the governor in his recent press conference stated he's increasing Chapter 70 aid by $200 million to continue and expand the implementation of the foundation budget review recommendations. What he failed to mention was that he also increased the total MLC burden by $239,663,134. So foundation budget increasing, but the burden to our towns has also increased, which is the same that happened in FY19 and FY18. So in FY20 compared to FY10, there's been a 22% increase in the burden on municipalities. And comparatively, there has only been a 10% increase over the same time period in what aid has been. So we've been on a trajectory for a very long time of decreasing aids to municipalities. So the implementation of the Foundation Budget Review Commission is placing an incredible burden on municipalities. So it's completely shutting out 200 districts that are in hold harmless status, of which Dudley-Charlton is one of those districts. So the only increase in revenue that we will receive is from MLC, which now puts the burden on our towns. And I know that Dr. Nash is going to cover this in her presentation, but there has been some number crunching within the regional subcommittee, and the state to local aid split is 59% to 41%. If that were to switch 1% to go 58 to 42, you would be putting $34 million back in reducing the burden that's on regional districts. With the foundation budget review, the caution with that is that we're one of those districts that it's not going to help, and we're already at the bottom of the barrel. So, thank you.
So, thank you, everybody. Thank you for, first of all, joining and coming this evening. This is a little bit different for me. I'm used to normally presenting a budget and defending a budget with all of the FinCom and selectmen and other officials, and this is a little bit different this year because of the override. So the approach that I wanted to use this evening was to really talk a little bit about the past, which you know more than I do, a little bit about the present and where we are in FY20, and then the future, because I think there certainly are questions that certainly have not been answered, have been presented through the override process. So begin with talking a little bit about the past. I have a slide in here that most of you are familiar with, more familiar than I was until I read the Abrams report. I certainly know Mark Abrams. I've worked with him in other districts. He came in 2017, I think partly, as I understand it, a combination of things to look at and to understand where the communities were with respect to funding. So I wanted to refresh your memory so that you were aware of where and what he said with regard to the financial trend. The fact that the required net school spending in the state and the comparison that Dudley-Charlton is to the state funding for required net school spending. We are only over net school spending by 4.4%. Required net school spending is the minimum contribution. It was never meant to be the maximum contribution. It was the minimum that was set. It's a combination of things to arrive at that. But I think it's important to note that the state average, and this is 2 years ago, the state average at that point in time was 23%, and we were funding at 4.4% above net school spending. Certainly, I don't have to reiterate the per pupil expenditure. You'll see another slide later. The slide that we have at the end of this presentation updates you as to the most recent figures in FY18. We've gone up a little bit, but we're still nowhere near the state average per pupil spending. You take that difference of almost $15 million, if you can reach the state average, that's the difference. That's the difference when you talk about programs. When you talk about how a comprehensive public high school can compete with a voc tech school, we can't. We can't because we can't afford the types of equipment and personnel that they get. We can't offer those programs at this point in time. How do we continue to keep and be competitive when we talk about AP programs and how many courses you offer if you have to cut staff and you can't run those programs? So all of this enters into this discussion when you look at net school spending and your per pupil spending. You can't dispute facts, unfortunately. They are what they are. And you absolutely, if you want to look at that list, look at Boston Magazine that comes out every year when they rate their top schools, and one of the things that they look at is the per pupil spending. And to no surprise, the top 50 schools when I used to compare it when I was in Hanover, because we were just about at net school spending and we were just about over, and with per pupil with the state average, was that they were at least $6,000 more per pupil than we were in Hanover. So considering the fact, you're exactly right, considering what you spend, you do a darn good job. The teachers, the administrators in this district are working to provide the very best. The best is at this point. Think what we could do if we had a little bit more. Think of what we could do to be really up at this level. That's the issue. That's the challenge that we have. That's the challenge that public schools have today. They've always had that challenge. It's not a dispute. It's not about, it's all our money. We have to fund police, we have to fund fire, we have to fund emergency, and we have to fund schools. And the challenge for a town and cities is, how do we do that? That's the reality. How do we do that? There's only so much money. I'm not here to say we should have this and someone else should go without. The reality is, you spend this much, you get this much. That's the reality. And you look at every single school who spends at 17, 18, 19,000 per student. They are those schools I told you about, to no surprise. I worked in one of them. It's amazing. There is no want of resources for them. And so considering the money that you spend, it is well spent. It is absolutely well spent in this district with the amount of work that people do and the amount of money that you spend per student. It doesn't help, unfortunately, when you look at budget increases. If you look at the history of the budget increases, I can tell you that if we were to simply maintain our budget without laying off anybody, to open the door in this school almost every single year, to maintain personnel, programs, and services, you'll need a 3% increase. 3% of 50 million is 1.5 million every year. That's to simply keep all of the services you have, all of the programs you have, all of the personnel that you have. You might get away with a little bit less. I think I said to Robin the other day that somewhere between $1.2 million and $1.5 million is what you need every year. That's around a 3%, a little less than a 3% increase every year. The history shows you that that has not been the case in a consistent manner over a period of time. The Abrams report talked about a couple of things. It projected forward what it would look like, what the anticipation of cost would be in FY 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23 for a 3% budget. Now remember, a 3% budget is level services, not level funded. A level funded budget is a reduction budget. There are the costs. Those come from the Abrams report. So if you're looking at the fact that you're going to need $1.2 million and some change, $1.3 million, $1.3 million, almost $1.4 million, and $1.4 million, there's where the money is. So over 3 years, you need close to $4.5 million just to keep what you have, just to keep the level of effort that you currently have in your schools. That has not happened on a regular basis. It has happened. There are years when you can see where we received 3.41%, 5.50%, but anything in red is below. So therefore, reductions happen, reorganizations happen, retirements don't get filled, resignations don't get filled, strategic plans are not met because we can't do that. The question for us usually is, how do we sustain a budget? When we add personnel, I always say that's great, but how do you sustain that over time? Every person I hire in a region has an additional cost to it because, as you know, the region bears insurance. If you're in a non-region district, it's an indirect cost that comes back to you from the town. But we bear that burden of carrying the insurance in our budget. So every time insurance rates go up, one of the cost factors, big cost factors in the budget, 75% of that is borne by the school district, in this case, the region. So looking at the slide that talks about our level services needs, if we were to have a 3% budget and we received $1.5 million off the top, about $900,000 would go for salaries. 80% of our budget is salaries. So about 900,000 would be for salaries. The rest of that would be for costs that have been negotiated, for example, transportation. We run our transportation costs for SPED. We don't own our own vans, we don't have our own drivers, so that's through a company. There's a cost for that. There's a cost for gen ed transportation. We would look at insurance costs going up, all of those benefits that go up. Those are some of our high costs, as well as special ed. And special ed costs, with all due respect to circuit breaker, let me just tell you that circuit breaker had nothing to do with the state senators. Circuit breaker was written by two superintendents. Shelley Berman, who's still a superintendent, was an architect of that, along with Perry Davis, who was superintendent of schools in Dover-Sherborne. They were the reason that circuit breaker got passed, because we were complaining for years that the extraordinary costs for SPED were being borne totally by the district. It does not cover, it covers the extraordinary costs. So it doesn't cover some of those costs that you bear as a district. People think circuit breaker is the panacea. It answers all of the questions and all of the needs. It doesn't. It doesn't. And you'll see that later on in this presentation. You can look at, one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is I think a little bit unusual in this district, is the extraordinary dependency that Dudley-Charlton has had to develop on two areas: excess and deficiency, and school choice. I'm showing you a 5-year history, real history, of the dependency on E&D. Excess and deficiency initially in regional school districts came about many years ago, and one of the reasons that it came about was if you were in multiple districts with potentially 3, 4, 5 school districts, you didn't want to have to go back to those 5 districts for some kinds of costs during the year. It was very difficult to get all of those boards together and try to get them all to agree, and then you had to look at your regional agreement. So E&D used to be something that only regional districts could have to carry over. We rely on E&D to balance our next year's budget. It is not meant for that. It has never been meant for that. It has been meant for extraordinary costs, capital costs that may happen. In Old Rochester, when I served in the school committee for 15 years, we had an E&D account of $3 million. We had a couple of extraordinary costs having to do with our HVAC systems. We did not have to go back to our 3 communities. We were able to fund it from that. We do not have that luxury here. We roll forward every year. We hold our breath, and we roll forward every year at least $1 million to help offset next year's budget. Not a good practice, and we're trying to wean us off of that. Over the next 5 to 10 years, we certainly ought to look at moving back from that and not having such a heavy reliance, so that when something happens, particularly in capital, we would have the ability to move forward and fund that and not have to go back to the towns. The other area that has become a dependency for this district is school choice. You can look at the amount of money over the last 5 years that this school district has depended on for school choice. This is a revenue stream that helps to, again, offset the budget. For next year, we will be dependent on $890,000 in school choice. What does that mean? On the next page, I show you what that means. Currently, we have 147 students who are school choice in our district. Giving you the breakout, 132 of those are at the high school. Next year, our recommendation to the school committee, in order to balance our budget, to arrive at the $890,000 that we're going to need, we're going to up that to 180 students. We will look at our recommendation to the school committee next week will be that we will add 30 seats to the high school, and potentially in grade 9, and we'll split 30 seats between our 2 middle schools. School choice, again, is another one of those accounts that most school districts do not use to balance a budget. They use it sometimes to pay for a position. They use it for some one-time costs like instructional resources, but they do not use it to the degree that this district has used it, at least in my experience as a superintendent of schools for 10 years. I've never seen this happen. I've never seen this much money being used to offset a budget. It's not a normal type of thing, but it's had to happen. Again, I don't fault a single person. The problem is the state has not come forward and done what it should have done years ago. It hasn't done that. And so every year we get deeper and deeper and deeper as they have more and more mandates that come out. And we have to add staff for social emotional learning. We have to worry about the child who has a life-threatening allergy. We have to make sure a bathroom is handicap access. We now have ELL templates that we need to develop for students, plans for students. All of that takes time, resources, that's money. State hasn't done a lot. Again, with all due respect to the senators and the representatives sat here. I've lived through it. Mandates in ed reform, curriculum initiatives, Common Core, MCAS testing. This year, every single person in our district will take their test online. Every single person. That means we need to make sure our infrastructure is working. We need to make sure that we have all of the resources, all of the hardware that they need. We asked the state for some kind of funding, particularly those districts out in Western Mass who weren't ready. They gave us a couple of years, but we never saw a lot of funding along with that to help us. And you people supported that last year through part of your override. Through $1 million, you helped us make 6 of our schools, and by the end of this summer, 7 schools, all schools, will have that capacity, will have the infrastructure in place. But you need to understand, and the state needs to understand, there needs to be a renewal plan for all the devices that we use. Our devices are getting to the end of their shelf life. And we can't support that in our current budget to have an ongoing replacement cycle. We have organizations like our foundation that steps forward and purchases carts and devices for us, but that's not the way to do it. Again, it is happening across the state. It's not just in this district. And so, again, when I sound like I'm mad, I am mad because I've been listening to this for a lot of years and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed from the state perspective. You'll see some things that we're not sure of. They're budget unknowns. They're just things that at this point in time, we still have some areas that could have some impact, we hope positively, on the budget. And I list those for you. We are in negotiations with our DCTA, so we don't know where that will end up, and so therefore it's an unknown. We certainly cannot predict what sped increases may happen, particularly with services, tuitions. When we build the budget through through February, we generally know at that point in time where we are, and we project and predict what may happen going forward. But if something happens between that time and April 1st, we own that cost. And so, again, we are mindful that that's what circuit breakers should really be used for. We should be using that as a set-aside to ensure that when we have people who move in or when we have changes in IEPs, we're able to make sure that we have the funds moving forward to support that student. We also are talking about, as I think it was alluded to, some joint purchasing. We are in the midst right now of having those discussions and meetings. If things go well, we will enter into a joint purchase group for insurance. It will be us, Webster, Douglas, thank you, and the town of Stoughton. Millbury was involved, but we're going down south where I live, the town of Stoughton. We're presenting to our groups, our constituents. We will be the only regional district, and the rest are all towns. And we're hopeful that there will be a positive. We see this as a positive, certainly, for our budget. But again, it's an unknown as of now. But there's some potential areas in our budget right now that we hope will end up being positives. I'm not going to talk about the next page. We know what the formula is. We know what Chapter 70 is. We know what foundation budget is, but I would just remind you that a foundation budget was never meant to be the maximum. It's the minimum. And when we talk about required net school spending, we always want to talk about above and over required net school spending because, again, to no surprise, The combination of local and Chapter 70 unfortunately gets you to required net school spending, but usually a district today needs more than that. We're over that by 4.4%. As I said to you, the state average back in FY16 was 23% over. So while it's great to be over, there are lots of people who are over more than you. And you want to be somewhere a little bit more than that. Certainly, you're not going to be up again competing and being 180% over, but there are districts that are 180% over. It's amazing. Again, the issue of equity, adequacy and equity. An adequate budget is great. The state stepped in because of that lawsuit. And they said, where you rest your head at night makes a difference. And if you slept in Brockton back in the 90s, you did not get the same education as a student in Weston, Wellesley, or Wayland, Concord, Carlisle, Dover, Sherborne, Acton, Boxborough. You did not. And I would contend that today you still do not. That's why this lawsuit is continuing. That's why the Mass Association of School Superintendents this Friday is making it an initial push harder than I've ever seen them. I applaud them because I don't know about my colleague, but it's the most involved I've seen them about ed reform and the need finally to do something. And I don't know what will happen because there are going to be winners and losers. And that's the hard truth about why some legislators will back off, because they know their district is fine right now, but if this formula changes, it may not be. And that is the reality. But I believe there are other ways that we can fund school districts potentially without just looking at that formula. You'll see this year our funding sources from state aid. You can compare it to last year. Very subtle increases. So if you look, for example, in Chapter 70, it's around $73,000. Partly that's because your actual Chapter 78 is greater than your foundation because enrollments are going down and they're holding you harmless. So thus you're only getting the $20, the $73,000 total. Not atypical across the state that overall enrollments are going down. It seems to be a trend. When I talk with other colleagues, we're seeing enrollments on the decrease, not increasing. The problem is, while those enrollments generally from year to year may come in different grades, they're not enough for you to typically take a program and get rid of a program. I had a selectman once when I was in Freetown Lakeville say to me, look, the enrollment has decreased by 150 students. Why do you need all the same teachers? And I said, well, first of all, it didn't all happen in grade 2. If it happened in grade 2, then I could probably decrease a few teachers. It happened across the board. Do you still want me to run the AP programs at the high school? Yeah, we do. Do you still want me to run a schedule at the middle school that provides for these types of services? Yes. Well, the reality is we're losing students across the board in all grades, pre-K-12. Do you still want small kindergarten classes? They used to be 25. Now our numbers are down and they're 18 to 19. Or do you want me to put them back? Then I can reduce a teacher. And they said, no, we want the small kindergarten classes. It makes sense. Early education, we want to start small. We don't have support staff in there. Perfect. So that's the problem. If it all came in one place, we could probably do that, but it's not. Now, we're seeing the decline like everybody. We're down to 3,800 compared to last year. You'll see that in the slide I show you. But then look at your class sizes that we're projecting for you and tell me that you don't think those are the right class sizes for us to have. So when we talk about the other offsets besides E&D and school choice, what else do we use to balance our budget? What else do we use as we move forward in FY20 or any budget year? Here are the other big areas besides E&D and school choice. Transportation revolving, we take money out of that on a yearly basis, hopefully, and move that forward for our next year's budget. Any capital reserves that we have, also donations. Medicaid money you'll see next year or this coming year, FY20, we're earmarking $200,000 for Medicaid money. Not $100,000. Athletic fees, be they somewhat small, we pass on fees, as you know, most schools do, parking fees, athletic fees, all kinds of fees. Small as they may be, again, they're being borne by parents. Those fees, almost every school district in the state of Massachusetts has some kind of fee, again, because they're all struggling similar to us. Preschool tuitions for those peer students, those students who are not required to be there, we charge that. The current fee you charge is relatively small compared to other districts, but then if we move it higher, we're not going to get a lot of children who are going to want to come, and we need to have peers as role models for students with disabilities. State and federal grants, E-rate reimbursement, and cafeteria revolving. So here are the figures, though. All of those monies are monies that we move forward next year. Before that budget even comes to the towns, we've already reduced that budget by all of this that you see, all of these revenue offsets. $1 million will be used and is being used as an offset for next year's budget. $890,000, as I said, in school choice. So we need to have 180 students. If we fall below that, then we have some issues. So it's important for us to make sure that all of those seats are filled. The question is, at what point is it enough? At what point does Dudley-Charlton lose its culture, lose its identity, because you have more students coming who really don't live in either community? And that's really, where you have to start looking at that. At what point do you want your football team to have more students from other communities than from Dudley or Charlton, or any other sports team, or any activity, or any event that you run? I would suggest to you that $890,000 is a large amount of money that we're dependent on. And you can't look at the fact that you're going to always push that into the high school, in my opinion. It just won't work that way. So eventually, if you need to rely on that, you're going to have to move down to other lower grades. So, transportation revolving, 110,000 some change. Our capital reserves, Medicaid, as I said last year, I believe it was 100,000. This year we're able to use 200,000. Athletic fees, 105,000. Preschool tuition, 67,000. Those are our state and federal grants. Those pay for positions. $1.38 million, E-rate reimbursement, and then cafeteria revolving. We're very fortunate that you have run a very successful cafeteria. I held my breath when I came here, because typically cafeterias run in the red, and the fact that we are able to pay for all of our salaries out of the cafeteria was very refreshing for me, because I've always seemed to have worked in a district where I've had that as a challenge to try to continue to make it, keep it in the black. Kids particularly don't like some of the food we serve. They're eating. In Dover, Sherborne, they were all vegans. They were eating things that I never even had heard of at that time. And thankfully, my cafeteria manager, Janelle, knew exactly what they wanted. Major cost categories, to no surprise. We're a service industry. So our biggest commodity, our biggest plus are our teachers and our support staff and our administrators. They're the reason why your children come to school, your grandchildren. They're the reason why they show up and they get some of the best times that they ever had in their lives. In many instances, the best day sometimes they spend is with a teacher, unfortunately, for some young students. 80%, and the rest of it is 20%, makes up everything else, but it's very little. So when we talk about wiggle room, and we talk about how do we get our budget back to a different place, it means reductions in staff. We still have to run buses. We still have to light our schools. We still have to heat our schools. We still need all the commodities and supplies. We still have to have books, no longer pencils. But we need all of that. So when 80% of your budget, as you all can look at this, is staffing, then when we talk about reduction, how do you reduce a budget, you have to look at staff. A budget summary for last year and for this year. You can see the figures, the operating budget at $49,835,431. The capital, of course, is reduced because the debt goes away. For our total budget of $50,058,069. Again, Chapter 70 aid, that $73,000 and some change, gone up just a little bit. State aid transportation, some increase. No construction, of course, reserves and other revenues, and our total revenue, and then the assessments to the town. We'll talk a little bit more. Rich will talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. I wanted to show you a two-year comparison in enrollments as of October 1st. So you can see that we are down 134 students. You can see, again, numbers fluctuate a little bit. You can start to see the shift coming up in grades 2 through 4. You know, a year ago, we had 874. This year, we're down 820. Same thing, high school down 40-plus students, so you can see that. Again, it is a trend that I have seen across the state when I talk with my colleagues. I don't know if Superintendent Lamache has seen that in Bourne, although he's building a new school, so they're probably all going to come to your school.
We have a decrease as well.
You have a decrease as well. And I had it in Hanover, had it last year in Oxford and Freetown Lakeville. We saw it, and Hanover was starting back in 2004, 2005 when I was there. So we started to see that. We used to bring in and do all of these NESDEC studies when we were building our building, and I built a new high school in Hanover. The projection was going down. We had this huge argument with MSBA saying, we're going to build a school for the future, and they kept saying, well, sorry, but your future is at this number. And we kept saying, no, it's not. It needs to be higher. Well, we were at capacity at 850 students a few years ago, because you build what they tell you you're going to get, and that's about it with them. But you can see what our class size looks like. Yeah, this is great class sizes. These are the class sizes that you want to have. This is what teachers like. This is something that you don't want to give up, in my opinion. This is where good teaching and learning happens, because you don't have 27, 28, or 35 students, let's say, at a middle school, and 27 or 28 at an elementary school. And you can continue to run all of those standalone courses that kids want to take, so that when they leave high school and graduate, they have options. You want to run those. You want to run the 140-plus courses that typically high schools run. And you want to try to fill those with those kids. You want to run your AP classes, whether they're 10 kids or 12 kids or 8 kids, because this is their only shot to get that. So we've got, I think, some good class sizes for next year. We're projecting and looking at some potential changes that may happen, as we always know, in kindergarten when students come in, because kindergarten is one of those things that oftentimes people make some decisions as to whether they want to send a child. It's an option. You don't have to. And so sometimes people wait to the last minute, and sometimes they come in grade 1, and that's why you see the influx in grade 1, and they bypass kindergarten altogether. Wanted to share a little bit about special education, an overview on that. We have 540 students currently who are on IEPs. That represents 14.3%. That is below the state average. So in some ways, you do an excellent job. That means that we're doing a good job at trying to keep our students in district. We're trying to do a very good job at providing the programs for those students. This year, the school committee provided us with the ability to take a program, deconstruct it at Heritage, and create 2 programs, 2 very different, substantially separate programs that we needed for our students. Potentially, that keeps students in district, but for the future, for those students who may be coming in, parents see that you have these programs that you're running, and they note the success of those programs, and therefore, I'm not potentially wanting to go to a program that's out of district, again, unless you can't provide very specific services. Public education can't provide some of the services like medically fragile programs until you have a cohort of students large enough to make sense from an economy of scale. So sometimes we don't run all of the programs for deaf and blind students. We can't do that, and it doesn't make sense to hire someone. So that's where we get into the cost, the transportation. Special ed transportation is extremely costly. I ran it myself in Hanover. We owned our own vans. We owned our own drivers, and it's very expensive. In Freetown Lakeville, the same thing, and we had our own coordinator. We got out of that business, and as most school districts have, we couldn't afford the upkeep of the vans. The town every year had to renew a van, had to keep giving us a new vehicle every year because we were putting so many miles on. They couldn't afford it, and we got out of that business. And it is a big business for some companies. So when you move around and see some of those company names, you'll see some in particular, one of which we have here, but it doesn't come cheap. But we must ensure that all students, especially special education students, students with special needs, get the appropriate transportation And we can ensure that generally when we have a company whose only business is to provide that transportation. But it comes at a cost. You know, all school districts have seen that. And many of the collaboratives in my area, South Coast, have gotten into the business of providing transportation because they see it as another way to make some money. When it's costly to begin it, but if you establish yourself well, you will get many school districts who will end up going with you because you can provide that transportation better than they can. We run 9 substantially separate programs now in our district. They are across the board from K to 12. They are dealing with autistic students, emotional behavioral students, students with cognitive skills and delays. The law requires we educate students through 22, and so as a student ages out of a substantially separate program at the high school, they move into a program that is a 18 to 22, which really is preparation for life skills, and that's something that we're going to be dealing with this year in our budget and putting in a job coach specifically for those students. So that's part of the need in our budget that we've had to address. You can look at the tuitions. This district, again, has done a very good job, I believe, in managing this and ensuring that, first and foremost, students get what they need. And secondly, that we're cognizant that if we have a cohort of students that we can look at building a program, and over time, parents may decide that it's better to keep their child in district. The challenge that you have in a regional school district is where do you run the program? You may not have a cohort of students that you can run the program both at Dudley, let's say, elementary, and at Heritage. And so oftentimes for parents, they want their children to be with their friends, but we have to run the program at one school and not both because we just don't have a cohort of students, and it wouldn't make cost sense to do that. So that becomes more of a challenge in regions, particularly when you have 3 or 4. A lot of times, you just have to know that you're going to be transporting a student to another town, and the children in that program, maybe some of their friends may not be. So it becomes sometimes a challenge. But you can see that our projections are down for next year. When we did this budget in February, some of that was because our out-of-district tuitions, the students were aging out. So it's just we're fortunate in that respect. But at any given time, you can see those tuitions dramatically increase. In transportation, again, down a little bit. We're in a contract with Vanpool. So what year is that in the contract?
Out-of-district, we just renewed, and in district, we're in the 3rd year, I believe.
Okay. And then contracted services. Part of that going down is because we're going to hire in-house, and instead of doing contracted services out, we're bringing those providers in-house. And so it's really pushing it to another area of the budget. We do get revenues in SPED, as I said to you. Circuit breaker is an offset. You never want to use circuit breaker, in my opinion, in anticipation of balancing your budget. You always never want to plan for the unknown. The unknown is an estimate of what you think you're going to get. You really want to roll forward that to the next year. You can use circuit breaker over a 2-year period. So you don't balance your budget on an anticipation. It's like me saying, oh, Auntie's going to give me $1,000 because I'm really nice. I know I'm going to get it, so I'm going to go out and buy something. In my sense, you don't want to do that until you actually have it in hand. And in fact, you want to use the year before to move forward, and then that year that comes in, current year, you have that. Circuit breaker is a reserve in many ways. While we use it to offset our budget, and all school districts do that, you always want to have a reserve for the unknown that happens. Anything that happens between the time the school opens and April, you own that, whatever that cost is. And sometimes that cost is very high. And so you just need to know that circuit breaker has to be that go-to. The only way you can go around that is that potentially you have placeholders in your budget for tuitions. So in some districts, they'll actually build in a placeholder because they know that any given time, a student will be going somewhere during the year. Some student is going to be going out of district, and therefore they build in what we call placeholders. We use contingency in circuit breaker to do, in a sense, the same thing. We had a lot of goals when we started to develop this budget. The charge of the school committee was for us to develop a level services budget. They asked us also, though, to look at personnel with respect to some areas that we may need to add. and we did that. We wanted to address some of the new state requirements with respect to, particularly in this case, ELL. We had some concerns at some of our, at one school in particular, with respect to our health and safety needs, given the fact that we had a population of over 1,000 students. This was in particular, and you'll see it later, a nurse. Our high school has one school nurse. When you compare us to all of the other schools that we're compared to in the state, some of which fund very similar to us, one is Whitman-Hanson, which is in my neighborhood, my alma mater, they have 2 nurses. So you'll see later on in this budget that that was one of the things that we felt was a health and safety concern. And next year at the high school, we will have 2 nurses, Lord willing that we find them. So if you know anyone who's a registered nurse or certified, also and has a DESE license, we'll be posting that position. It's a critical safety, health need for us. More and more students, as they stay in district, have a lot of health needs. It takes a lot of time for services to be given to those students, and 1 nurse for 1,100 students really presents a challenge. We also wanted to try to address some of the things that you heard from the former superintendent as they came forward in the strategic plan. As you know, this year, maybe you don't, this year we were able to hire 2 integration specialists and also 2 school adjustment counselors, commonly called SACs. Those 2 school adjustment counselors are split between our 4 elementary schools. They really deal with some of the social emotional learning issues and the challenges that we have and that most school districts now face. In addition to that, our integration specialists, our technology integration specialists, work with staff and students at the elementary level, again, working within our elementary schools presently to better embed technology instruction. We also are proposing some changes in our special ed delivery model, and we've been able to do that through some reorganization that I'll talk about in a minute. So when we looked at proposing positions for the FY20 budget, we recognized that the administrative team proposed positions, many of which, and all of which, quite frankly, we could have and should have been able to support and fund. The reality was we couldn't, and we needed to go back and address the compliance issues from the state. We needed to look at the health and safety challenges that we had, and we absolutely needed to look at the mandates through special ed that are required. For example, a student's IEP that says that he or she, the student, will have a 1-on-1 or a 2-on-1. That we need to make sure that we meet. So that was all we really could address. We aim to address the strategic plan recommendations. We aim to address, for example, putting back in our middle school foreign language. We're not able to do that. We wanted to see if we could address some of the supervision and scheduling issues by looking at things a little differently. We weren't able to do that also. And we certainly wanted to try to do some things a little differently in programs, instruction. We'll maintain what we have. The district is working extremely well in implementing an initiative around project-based learning. That will continue. We have some resource needs that will need to eventually be worked into the regular budget in the future, but we have some grants that a number of our administrators have been involved in writing that have supported that, but again, in the future, those will have to come probably back into the budget. So what were we able to add in our budget? Thus, the reason why you received something a little bit more than probably what you expected, the $149,000 over. We needed to address the top 3 for us were an ELL teacher. Currently, we are not meeting the minimum 45-minute daily requirement. So we needed to address that. And so by hiring a 1.0 ELL teacher, we will be able to, at minimum, address that. So that's a mandate, in essence. That's what the law says. That's what we were not able to do. We're also, again, need to add 2 SPED assistants. We have a number of SPED assistants across the district. They serve our students in a lot of different capacities. They are wedded to our substantially separate programs. They are 1-on-1s, 2-on-1s, and they are also grade level. So when an IEP requires it, we're obligated to do that. And thus, these were 2 that were identified, and they're in the budget. They're the ones that we know at this point in time. The high school nurse I talked about. So those top three are the ones that really have kind of caused the little bubble at this point in the budget that you've received from us. There could be some possibility between now and the end of the school year. Obviously, you heard the legislators talk about some changes that may happen in the positive, also some changes that may happen within our budget, as we talked about, or I talked about the unknowns that we still have out there. If those become positives, then potentially we're able to address some of it in a different way. We also are hiring through some reorganization of special ed. So internal reorganization has given us a pool of money, and so we've looked at how we deliver services, and numbers 4, 5, and 6 are going to be funded through savings in a SPED reorganization, hopefully, that we are going to do. So that's really personnel. In other words, decreasing some personnel who have direct oversight and are not in classrooms, direct classrooms. But I wanted you to also to see what we weren't able to put in the budget, because every single one of these was presented with a great deal of, it was difficult for us to do a priority ranking of what needs to go, but we had to go and what needs to stay. But we had to address the health issues, the safety issues, and the compliance issues first. But none of us felt good about any of these that you see here on this page. These are currently not in the budget. We had ranked them as a district administrative team, so that should funds become available, we knew what was next up in the cycle. One of the positions that's here will happen, and we'll have to find out how to fund that. Currently, we see that CES may have the need to add a kindergarten teacher. And if we're able to, we will transfer a teacher from Mason Road. Again, that's all dependent on numbers at Mason Road. And if we do that, because all of our kindergarten classes have full-time aides in them, we're going to have to hire an aide for that teacher, because we can't transfer the aide. We're adding a new teacher in another building, and we need to add that aide. So that position will need to be funded by some way. We're going to have to find that money internally in our budget. And we will try to do that if that happens. Both principals from our middle schools requested, to no surprise, to add back foreign language. Currently, we do not. We have an equity issue. We cannot offer foreign language to all students. We actually have to have parameters for our students, and we would love to be able to do that, but we can't do that. And I know that was part of the strategic plan. It's high on our list, one of the top things that we wanted to put back in, but we do not have the resources to do that. We are, another recommendation was to address some of the inequity issues in our middle school libraries. Currently, the librarian, who's a certified librarian, is shared between two schools. Probably not the best, but she does a good job moving between them. So we're looking at trying to change that model a little bit and to have two people, one in each building. High school. We talked about the high school needs around safety, and I talked to you quickly about the comparative data that's out there. On the DESE website, you can go in and you can see comparative data that they develop for you called DOT data, and they compare you with like school districts. And if you look at those like school districts, you will see that their staffing is very different than ours. And the needs of students to have guidance counselors who work in a variety of capacities, more than what I remembered as my guidance counselor, who I saw maybe junior year and talked a little bit with them. We start counseling kids very early. We start working with them at middle school counselors, and when they get to high school, these counselors today are dealing not just with the areas that of needs for students going off to college, or those areas where students are talking about what they're going to do when they graduate. They're dealing with a lot of social emotional. It's not the typical guidance counselor. They don't stop and say, are you a school adjustment counselor? They say, are you a counselor? I need to see you. And so oftentimes you'll find guidance counselors doing the work that was reserved for someone else years ago, or quite frankly, ended up in the principal's or administrator's office because we didn't have school adjustment counselors and school psychologists to deal with students. Today, there are a multitude of issues that students come to school with. We had a conversation about this the other day, and I was talking with a colleague of mine who probably is my age. And we said, did we not have these issues years ago, or did we not simply deal with them? I don't know, really. I would like to think we dealt with them years ago, but I think we have a lot more expertise to deal with them today. When you look at the staff of schools now, they have a cadre of skill set. They are very talented. They do a lot of work that, quite frankly, oftentimes would have happened years ago, maybe through outside counseling, or sometimes it didn't happen at all. It didn't happen at all. So we're so wanting to add a guidance counselor at the high school, but not able to do that. We also you heard me talk about some of the schedule issues, and over the years, one way that the district, as I understand it, had begun to address the issues around funding was to not fill positions when people retired or when they received resignations. And part of that repercussion is that it impacts your schedule. It impacts the way we deliver instruction to students because it changes the model. It changes the program. And so by adding back a health or a PE teacher, it creates a different dynamic for students in what they get on a daily basis. And it provides some ability for us to ensure that we have a full cadre of courses for students to take, but we also are able to fill in some voids when students take some courses that maybe we would have wished that we didn't offer, but we had to offer. Years ago, we could have study halls. I don't know if you remember that, but probably some of you around here, you remember when you spent your time at the high school in a study hall, and if it was a massive study hall, they put you in the cafeteria, or you weren't in a room, and there were probably 100 or 150 kids there, and there were 2 or 3 teachers. When Time on Learning came out, and that changed everything, and the state, again, unfunded mandate, said, well, you really can't have that. So we kind of worked around that, called these things called directed studies, but we couldn't engage kids in the same way that regular classroom teaching happens. And so, because it meant that we had to add staff, and we couldn't do that. Or we had to negotiate differently with our unions so that we could add a period for them to teach or do something different. And that, again, equaled additional resources. And we, again, are one of the few districts who does not have a full-time athletic director. Currently, you have a .6.4. He is a part-time athletic director. Again, if you would look at all of the data, you would see that there is not any other district around your size with all of the sports teams that you run that does not have a full-time position as an athletic director. In and of itself, the scheduling, when you get into spring and you start looking at the rain and everything else that's happening, he's probably spending a good chunk of his afternoon rescheduling games. There are a variety of meetings that an athletic director has to attend. And someone who is doing this on a part-time basis could be out of your district 40 to 50 days, which equates to, if this person is a teacher, then you've got to find coverage. So definitely this is a position. We're still working at this. We may be able to come up with a solution, but we're not sure. But the committee recognizes this need as well as all of the others. And then lastly, we were down a custodian. Again, I'm assuming that over the years, the custodial staff number of positions were reduced either through retirements, resignations, or just the fact that you couldn't fund this. And at the high school, as many of you are aware, high schools and middle schools and even elementary schools now are used all the time. You want to encourage your outside groups, particularly anything with a Charlton and a Dudley before, you want them to come in. They are the people who fund this district. But it's very difficult when you need to have people there and the building needs to be ready the next day. We need to have custodians who can do 2 things. You can't ask them to clean on the second shift if they now have to be over working with someone else. So the challenge is with the square footage that we have with all of our buildings, we are probably down more than 1 custodian in this district when you look at square footage. Having said that, I've never seen a group of custodians like the group that you have. I've been in a lot of districts, and they are remarkable. They are not just people who come and do the job. From the head custodians to those who work the night shift, they go above and beyond. The first time I met them in the summer when I did the tours, I was impressed, and I continue to remain impressed by them. It isn't a job for them. They take this very seriously. They take great pride in keeping these buildings clean. When I walked through this building the first time and looked at all of the rugs, I remember with Mr. Packard, I kept saying, oh my gosh, how old is this building? How old is this building? Look at these rugs, look at these rugs. I couldn't believe it, because I know the work that is involved over the summer just maintaining these rugs. They do a remarkable job, but they are shorthanded. And particularly at this point, we know that the high school is shorthanded. And it is in constant use by our own groups as well as the outside groups. And we want those groups to come in because they are the people, they're the reason why we're here. I mean, they are the ones who fund us, and we want to continue to ensure that we can provide quality, space for them, clean space for them, safe space for them. So we've also been able to reorganize a little bit, and without really cost, looking at how we provide our services. So we'll be doing some reorganization. One of the things that I think we're really happy about next year is that we'll be able to put back 2 of the library assistants into the elementary schools. We used to have 4, they tell me. We now have none. They're volunteers. We have wonderful people who come in, but it's not the same. So you may ask, how are we able to do that? Creatively, we have a very strong cafeteria lunch fund. So currently, what we're going to do next year is to take the funds that we are currently paying for our lunch monitors, move that back into the revolving, be paid for that, and be able to fund the others in our regular budget. So for at least 1 year, we'll be able to have them, and we hope that as the cafeteria revolving maintains a strong balance, we would be able to continue to do that. To me, that's vital. Early literacy is a key, and to not have libraries who have full-time people in them, at least on a part-time basis. They will not be there next year, 5 days a week, but I can tell you that the 4 elementary principals are chomping at the bit to get these positions back, whether they have them 2 days in one or 3 days in another. It is critical to encouraging and promoting reading at an early age. So, override, impact. I was not here. I applaud you. I've never gotten an override through in my entire career. So I applaud the towns. I think it is phenomenal that the townspeople of Dudley and Charlton recognized that this district was at a crossroads, a very critical crossroads. The cliff is there, and what you did was to step up, and it's not easy because it is borne by every single taxpayer, and no matter who you are, no matter whether you have children in school or not, and you made a commitment. And that, on my part, this is the first time in my entire career as a superintendent that I have not had to cut in a budget. I've not had to hand out layoff letters to people because I couldn't afford them. The first time. And I've been a superintendent for 10 years, and I've been in 4 different districts. This is the first time. I cut 7 people last year in Oxford. So I was so thrilled that while we were not able to fund everything, that we were able to not have to hand out layoff letters, not have to go through the riffing process, not have to sit down with Mr. Foley from DCTA and go over, here's the way I see this happening. It is critical, but you only really answered the problem short term. And I don't have the answer long term. And I don't know that any district has that answer long term. Given the fact that just to maintain level services, you're going to need 3%, maybe in a good year 2.5%, 2.75, and you figure it out. Mr. Abrams showed you the same thing. I don't know where that money is going to come from. I think that's the challenge, and that's the real challenge in the next few years of looking at this. How will that happen? It's a real challenge going forward. We were able to use the monies from the override to commit to technology, the $1 million of that $3 million, provided the upgrade in 6 of our schools, and you heard me say that the 7th school will occur this summer, the high school. And we're able to sustain to the best of our ability, with the exception of the additional $149,000 that we're looking for, staff, and still reorganize and do some things, add some positions. still a little short when you start looking at the need to address those safety concerns as well as the challenges around providing the right services for students who are ELL students. We continue to remain the most recent numbers. These numbers came out today, so we have moved up. The good news is, but then the state average probably has moved up too. So again, to no surprise. So when you look at what you do and how you spend your money, you are exactly right. You get a great bang for the buck, as they say. For the amount of money we spend, we should be pleased at where our students end up, where they go to school, how we educate our students, what happens to them when they move through the elementary schools to the middle schools to the high school. You have top performing teams, sports teams, activities, and the point of that is that everybody wants to continue it. The culture in this district is phenomenal. It is a phenomenal culture.
Thank you very much.
I came here, and I have never in my life received so many cards on my first day. I hadn't done anything. Cards, a plant, flowers. I thought, gee, do they know I'm the superintendent? I was shocked. And then they sent me notes. So stay tuned, Steve. This is what troubles me, and it's not just this district, but when you have this, you want to hold on to this. And what happens over time, it begins to erode because you just can't continue with that same level of services. So when all of a sudden you start getting class sizes creep up, you start getting more challenges and more issues, and everything changes. You want to hold on to that culture. You know, people want to be here. They want to come here. That's what I hear. I've never heard that in other districts. So it is amazing to me, and I know that it's something that has not fallen, on your ears as far as, you hear this. You hear this when you're out in the community. This is a wonderful school district, and you have supported it, and I appreciate that as someone who just came in for the year. I appreciate the fact that you stepped forward in that override and supported it. And the big question for us is, what's it going to look like going forward? How will that continue? And I don't have the answer, so I'll end with these questions, with no answers.
Thank you very much for your
So,
presentation.
You're welcome.
So that was a lot of information in a very succinct manner, and we appreciate it.
I don't know how succinct it was, the former English teacher in me, so be careful.
But your questions are well put, because we do have that override going on, but that will come to an end. And I remember sitting here December of 2017, having a discussion with everybody, and we all decided, both towns, all the committees at the table, everybody who was present, we have to have an override, has to be for 3 years. We wanted 5, we want long-term planning, but we agreed to 3. And that's gonna go by pretty quick. So we're gonna have to come back together and go, what do we do? So thank you for that perspective that you brought.
I'll add, though, 2 things, because on that last page, while we're thinking about just the funding to sustain the budget on a year-to-year basis, there are 2 other things looming out there that we can't forget. One is that we are going to be coming back, we're looking at a capital plan, facilities plan. The committee will be hearing from a company that we hope that we'll be able to bring in to do a master plan so that both towns will know and have prioritized what the facility needs are in the district, both repair as well as any other concerns that we have. Currently, to no surprise, some of you probably have children in either middle school, we have 2 leaking roofs. And I am sure that when this audit happens, that in this capital plan, this master capital plan gets built, that all of those sitting at this table and those at home are going to take a big gulp when they see what that figure looks like. But that's something to think about, because that will be here before you know it. We would anticipate potentially coming back in the fall with that, It doesn't mean, to present it, we would anticipate involving some of the stakeholders at this table early on in that process, so that you can understand and see what this is going to mean for the school districts, your buildings. There's a great deal of investment in buildings, and they are the facilities that educate our students. Without them, we can't do anything. The second piece is we will be submitting an SOI again to MSBA for Shepherd Hill High School. It's due this April. We have submitted it for how many years?
Over
Bill,
13.
over 13, there's my historian, over 13 years. There is a pecking order, I am convinced, in MSBA. You will eventually get something. You've got to be prepared. I don't know what it will be. It could be this year. But we are submitting it. We'll see what happens. The longer we wait, again, the needs continue to escalate with the school, and more importantly, how we deliver our services at a high school when we talk about 21st century learning. So I just wanted to just alert you of those two things. So in addition, bad news, in addition to talking budget on a year-to-year basis, you've got two other things potentially that could be looming out there for the community to, have to think about and digest, and that's an awful lot. And so,
It is.
Yeah, it is.
As we move on the agenda, and I thank everyone for their patience in being here tonight, I just wanted to hear from Dudley Town Administrator, Charlton Town Administrator, on your thoughts going forward, sir.
Yeah, so thanks very much. In the past, what we've done is, Robin and I have kind of given a summary as to where we are, and kind of an idea of where we've been and where we think we're gonna go. To kind of do a recap, the override took the town's tax rate, increased our tax rate by $1.77, and I don't want you to forget that caused a lot of issues in Dudley. People were very angry and very upset. So I would caution going forward that any increases in large capital things, keep in mind that taxpayers are already upset with the fact that their taxes went up $1.77 or 15%. And I did a little bit of math while we were sitting here because I wanted to see of that $1.77 how much was related to the override. And $1.52 of the $1.77 was related to the override. So it's a substantial effort that the town has made. Our revenues go up about a little bit over $500,000 a year. So when I hear that your status quo budget is $1.5 million, that's a number that I don't like to hear, because the town under no circumstances has that ability to pay a portion of $1.5 million unless we sit down and figure out how we're going to get additional funding into the budget. So we're very modest in terms of what we can afford in my community. My community is very proud of the fact that it has a low tax rate and still has a low tax rate, and very prideful of the fact that the average single-family residential tax bill is low. People like that. So our budget growth, our revenue growth is about 2.7%. Town budgets fit within that number. We have some significant debt costs and health insurance costs this year that we face, and we'll have to deal with that. And then we'll have to find a way to reconcile what we have available, what your needs are for the next fiscal year. So that's our situation. I want to just kind of lay it on the table in as few words as possible. That don't underestimate the Dudley voters in terms of the significant contribution that they made, increasing their tax rate by $1.77, and their unwillingness to take other big steps in the immediate future. I think that's something we need to kind of keep in mind.
Thank you. It is important to be mindful of that.
Thank you. Our taxpayers also felt the pinch.
Very much.
You just made the papers more than we did.
Yeah.
A little bit. I'm going to be quick, because I know this has been going on for a while, so I'm just going to kind of give a quick overview. I presented a balanced budget to the Finance Committee. It included some unexpected larger things that we didn't anticipate, but we were very fortunate to be able to add those in. So we have a balanced budget. Because of we are in the second year of the override, that's also given us a little bit of relief. which was much needed. Bay Path came in with a very large number, $250,000 just for Bay Path, and so we're not even talking about insurance, retirement, pension, other increases. We have generally about the same amount in new revenue as Dudley. Out-of-district student, we were just informed by Dudley-Charlton that we have one. We were thinking we were not. We had 3. They were coming off. We thought, so that'll add anywhere from $30,000 to $45,000 to our budget, which is not in our budget. So Finance Committee is hearing this for the first time. Revenue equity, one of the things that we did find that we needed to do was to take a look at our pay equity and the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee has made some adjustments which were very, very much needed, and we appreciate to be able to do that. We're working on bringing economic development into town, and we know that that's one of the kind of saviors for us to be able to keep a reasonable tax rate to our taxpayers. It looks like we have 2 new marijuanas that are going to be coming online. A third we're not sure about. But if the overall came in, or all of them came in, we could be looking at least $50 million over 5 years or more. So we're holding our breath in that. The state increase this year, I still remember when somebody talked about study halls, I remember when we used to get $300,000 to $400,000 a year from the state. That has gone waylaid. This year, what the state gave, they took back, and the end number that we had an increase in local aid was $10,000. So that's our total increase from the state. And lastly, the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee have a priority in one of our buildings. And the Board of Selectmen has appointed a Public Safety Building Committee who has been working diligently to try to we absolutely need a new fire station. And in that, their wisdom said, we're not that far off from needing a fire station, another police station. They're looking at combining the police and fire for a new building. The town hall at this point is busting somewhat at the seams, and we're putting people like our finance director in a closet. We need additional space, so we would like to free up that police department to be able to expand a bit for our administrative offices. And as you know, all of that costs money. We will be going to town meeting to ask for construction, and we're looking at about a $28 million investment in that public safety building. So those are the things that we are looking at this point, and I think that's it. That's all I want to say at this point. I don't know if, what else you'd like to do.
I'm gonna end the meeting the same way I started. Oh, except,
From Charlton Finance,
no,
of course.
please, go right ahead.
In more trouble. Appreciate, we went through this about 2 years ago.
Yes.
And I think most everybody here was at that meeting. I know there's some new people. But having talked to the voters and things, I've talked to people who are very much in favor of the override and voted for the override. They're also totally and completely against another override. So I wouldn't expect another override, at least within 10 years. I'm not sure about that. So it's important to us to have increased new business and new tax money coming in, Dudley too, to start funding. Otherwise, we're going to go back to where we were a few years ago. We're going to eliminate one police officer, or maybe not have a fire department, or maybe you might have to cut a few people you don't want to cut. So I'm hoping we do get new tax increases, new tax money coming in, and we'll just see how everything goes. But tax overrides, I think, are out for now.
And as I said earlier, the cost of nothing goes down. So I just wanted to open it up to the floor, because we do have on the agenda, action needed. And we have a wealth of knowledge around this table. I wanted to open it up to the people who are here and hear what you have to say. I know you've gotten a lot to absorb tonight. There's a lot to digest. and perhaps, you know, we end this meeting with an agreement that we come back together. Does that sound like a good idea to everybody? Yes? Like, sounds good? Okay,
It's a good idea if we all keep talking.
exactly.
You know what your problems are, you know what our problems are, and we can come up with solutions.
So as we work through our respective towns' budget processes over the next few months, we should all come back together with our action steps, so that, as you very clearly pointed out, we're not back at the table going, what do we do?
I actually do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I haven't looked exactly at this budget, and I don't have all the numbers, so I'm not comparing. You did say that you're asking for an increase over last year, which if the agreement was to maintain level funding for 3 years. Are you at the beginning of looking at your budget at this point? Are you telling us what it is that you would like? I know generally we have conversations and there's additional reviews of the budgets. Can you tell us, certainly for us who's trying to have a budget, and anticipate what we can anticipate from the school at this point?
Pauline, do you want me to address
Go
that?
ahead.
Okay. So I think some of the unknowns, we're hopeful that those will become positives for us, so that we'll be able to definitely take those top 3 positions and be able to encompass that in our own budget. And, you know, we're still looking to see what's going to happen with the House and the Senate. If we heard them, maybe we'll see some change to the positive there. So I can't answer your question, but it's a work in progress. The school committee will certify, you know, and vote the budget, but I think there could be some potential for some shifts, you know, as we go through the year and see where those unknowns end up as knowns. I know that's not really an answer, but I don't have an exact answer other than we know somehow we have to fund those positions. We have no choice, and I really don't want to lay off someone as a result of that. And so I'm hopeful that there will be some shifts in the unknowns, and we'll be able to handle it internally. But I can't speak. Rich, do you want to?
No, I think that's an accurate representation of where we are currently. You know, given the fact that the House isn't going to come out until really just before town meeting, that's going to be the best information I think that we have to work from. So we'll have to, you know, see what they do, hope that it's in our favor, and then hope that, you know, unlike a couple of past years, the Senate doesn't come in and make dramatic changes in the end. And God willing, they actually adopt a budget before June 30th this year, as opposed to late July.
Well, I want to ask a quick question then, if I may. I was going to try to let it go, but I can't. In the document, it says when the override years are over. I understand it was a 3-year plan when the override passed, but the override's forever. That's not over. The money's going to keep coming forever. And as Greg pointed out, just based on our average revenues that we're allowed to raise, and we have the same fixed cost that the school department has. I understand it's a school committee meeting, joint meeting, it's not a Board of Selectmen joint meeting. How do we go back to our people and tell them we have the same fixed costs you guys have, insurance, staffing, contractual obligations, when at a minimum, you're telling us 1.5, but then with the numbers you alluded to, if you get every penny, we don't have the same buzzwords as you guys, minimum contribution, foundation budget, but we do have the same concept. You get your pennies, every penny for your minimum or your foundation, that means we have nothing left for us on the Dudley side. Matter of fact, it's more probably than we raise. So we can dialogue all we want. I'm sure you guys are in the same boat. That's pretty much the bottom line. If the minimum or the foundation numbers are met on top of the override monies that you already got, we're gonna come out of this even or negative. And I know it's a living, breathing document, and you can make changes, and I think it'd be great if we had an athletic director. I think it's great if we get aides, but I think it's great if we can put a guy in an ambulance when we need it. I think it's great if we can put a guy in a dump truck when we need the plow. I think it's great if we can have a firefighter, EMT, when we need it. And we're not even gonna be able to probably sustain what we have.
Well, the foundation budget isn't set by us. The foundation budget is set by the state. Basically, it says this is the amount of money that's adequate
And they determine that. And then they give you a formula for your local contribution, and then they give you aid. So foundation was never meant to be the maximum that you should fund a school. And you're exactly right. We're all competing for the same amount of money, and there's only, as you've said, there's only X amount of money that you raise, and you've got all these departments that need to have a piece of that money. So, the reality down the road is that on any given year, as I said, and I just want to clarify that, 1.5 is at the 3%, if you need 3% increase. But I initially said to you, and if you look at Mark Abrams' figures, that he calculated back in 2017, they start out and they gradually increase to, I think, $1.4 million and some change. So in a good year, you could get away with $1.2 million potentially, but if 900,000 of that is based on your salaries without anything else, without any other contractual obligations, we're in the same predicament that every other department is in. We deliver services. Police deliver services, fire, EMTs. We all deliver, library, we all deliver services, and we're competing for a small amount of money that towns and cities have. I don't have the answer, and so as every department cuts, the school department will have to cut. And the reality is, as I've experienced it over the years, when I've had to cut for 7 years in a row in Hanover until there was bleeding in the streets, and you started cutting things that really impacted, just like you do in other departments, when you can't pick up the phone and get the ambulance right away because you now are not able to supply it the way you should, with the staff it the way you should, then people sometimes say, well, okay, enough's enough. But I hear you. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know what will happen. Continuing to have dialogue, I believe, so that you don't pit one another against each, because that's not what it's about. We've all got to have services that we can deliver to the constituents. It's the voters who will determine whether they want to support all of those services. Yeah. I'm just telling you the reality is, right, this is the school department's reality. As you said to me, this is our reality too. And I understand that. This is our reality. But as that override, it doesn't last forever. That override was meant to sustain for a period of time, and then when it's after that, if towns can only give you $600,000 and you need $1 million every year, you're $400,000 short, so you're going to cut positions. That is the reality. And you get to a point eventually, after 7 years of doing that you've cut so deeply that people say, stop. And then the taxpayers in 10 years speak again. They speak again. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, just from the audience, could you elaborate more on, because I've heard it a few times now, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Bill.
I keep hearing that the override's not for us. But as the gentleman mentioned, it is. So I know as last year when it was passed, there was some capital expenditures as part of that. Now, when those roll off, obviously, those should then be rolled into your operating budget. So I'm just trying to wrap my head, and I'm not being prosecutorial, I'm just trying to understand better around what that statement means for the taxpayers, selfishly Charlton first, but then Dudley also.
I think I can answer. We got $3 million. $1 million was for the technology. $1 million was to sustain the budget, $1 million for new positions and things like that. This year we could use the extra $1 million for technology because it was already paid for. So we use that to go into the budget to pay for the raises or things like that. I think what Dr. Nash means is that $3 million is accounted for in this budget. If anything goes up, the override can't pay for it because it's already been designated for $3 million worth in this budget. So I think by saying it's gone, we don't really mean it's gone. It's just we don't have that extra money to, let's say the teachers, 900,000, let's say. Well, we don't have that extra million because we already assigned it to something in this year's budget. I think we don't mean it's gone, it just means it's not going to help us after this year. That's why I think when we did the override, I think we said it was for 2 years, not 3 years. We had said that would help us for 2 years, but the third year would be the problem, and that's what's happening. Not this year, but next year.
I would just caveat, as Dole mentioned, that when we talk around the finances and our needs, et cetera, that you might want to refrain from stating it like that, only because a lot of the taxpayers, their ears are going to perk up and say, well, this was supposed to be permanent, and it was supposed to go to the school, it was supposed to help. So when anyone's going to hear temporary or going away, even though semantically I understand it, it's a little, I don't want to say dangerous.
I think it would be better to say it's already been used for something,
Yeah, allocated, pre-allocated.
Right, it's already allocated, so right now, there's no new money next year because that 3 million's been taken care of this year.
So it's sustained you for FY 18 and 19.
But I'm
And, excuse me, 20, excuse me, 20. Let me take that back. 19 and 20, it sustained you, yeah.
One of the ways we looked at it when we put it together, the first year, and these are Charlton numbers, and you can double them for Dudley for the total. The first year, they'd need roughly 500,000 for operating, and they had roughly $1 million left over for other things, whatever was appropriate. The second year of the $1.5 million, $1 million would be for general operating, and there'd be roughly $500,000 left over for technical and other things. In the third year, the whole $1.5 million would be for operating, and then while we still get the last $1.5 million, or 3 if you want to add it together, but in the fourth year, they're going to be looking for more than that. They've already got the $3 million, and in the fourth year, they'll need more money, whatever the number might happen to be. So that's how we looked at it when we were putting it together. But the $1.5 million every year, or $3 million is there forever. But they'll need more than that in the fourth year, at least roughly.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. I see the clock on the wall is almost 9 o'clock. I'd like to thank everybody for coming this evening. Thank Dr. Nash. Thank you all for participating, and we will see everybody soon.